Hi, everybody. I am here with Layton, who is a detransitioner, and we connected on Twitter, where Layton talks about her experience as a detransitioner and also her work right now that she's doing with somatic healing and therapeutic coaching. So, Layton, welcome. Thank you so much for taking the time to come and talk with me.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to talk with you. So, just to start off with, can you tell us a little bit about, before we get into your journey to how you got to where you are today, tell us a little bit about your work. What is somatic therapy and what do you do?
So I'm a somatic practitioner, and that involves a lot of lifestyle changes, nervous system regulation, really getting into the body and into the root of things. I noticed that for me, talk therapy wasn't really something that helped me, and somatic therapy was absolutely life changing to the point where I just became so obsessed with it that I really wanted to do it every day. I really am completely obsessed with somatics and the nervous system. And it's really this idea that the body keeps the score of everything that we've ever experienced, everything that's ever happened to us, and that it kind of remains in the body and in the nervous system until we get in there and root it out. And when it's in there and we don't know that we have all of this trauma and all of this pain, it will manifest as disease or symptoms of mental illness, sickness, pain, chronic fatigue, all of these things. And that was all stuff that I was dealing with. So for me to realize that I didn't need all of these outside crazy cures or anything, all of the paths that I had taken towards healing before that were very external and didn't really do anything for me, it was incredibly powerful and empowering for me to realize that my body, my own body, was the key to so much healing and so much transformation. And so in my sessions, I usually will start off by doing a full lifestyle check. I look into someone's diet, I look into their relationship with their body currently, the kinds of emotions that they experience throughout the day. Do they feel connected to their body? Are they disconnected from their body? Do they exercise? What's their sleep like? What kind of somatic, physical sensations do they experience in the body when they feel stressed or when they feel emotional or when they feel happy, and kind of trying to break all of that down to figure out what the current state of their nervous system is. And then from there, we do different exercises to try and build a real relationship with the body. And it really is a relationship. It's something that has to be fostered. It's something where you have to put so much time and energy into establishing trust with yourself. Because so much of us, we have broken our own trust over time, or the world has broken our trust, and it doesn't feel safe to be in the body. So it's really important to me to help people with that. And I do charge for most of my sessions, but I also, for detransitioners, offer this for free because I feel like it is so important. And unfortunately, I can only do that for 5 people at a time. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to eat. But it's so important to me, that people have access to this kind of work, and access to this kind of healing, because I don't think that healing is something that you should have to break the bank for. And especially as detransitioners, we lose trust in the medical establishment. We don't trust them anymore. We don't feel like they have our best interest at heart or in mind, and we don't trust therapists, and it's hard. So I think a lot of people end up feeling lost and confused and frustrated. And I like to offer a safe space for that, because I guess you could say my special interest is helping people get out of survival mode and just connect to themselves.
Wonderful. That's a beautiful mission right there. And I have to say, I personally have some experience going to a somatic therapist, and I had the same experience as you where the talk therapy, it was not doing anything for me, even maybe counterproductive.
Mm,
And I had gone through this traumatic experience in my life, and I was recommended to go to a somatic therapist, and it was really incredible and surprising. And it can be a little bit also hard to explain sometimes what
mm,
is done. And I was wondering if you could give some examples of exercises that you might do with someone who
mm,
is, for example, a detransitioner or someone who's struggling with gender.
mm. Yeah, I kind of have these basics that I'll start out with because, like I was saying, when you're so disconnected from your body and yourself, the first thing we have to do is reestablish that connection. One of the most simple things that is often overlooked, and especially I think in this society, we want everything to happen quickly. We want everything to happen right now, and we tend to neglect the little baby steps that get us there. And especially when it comes to paying attention to things within ourself or our body that we don't necessarily want to pay attention to. So I like to always give examples with myself and things that I do in my own life because I think that it helps people envision it for themselves. It helps them envision how they would speak to themselves. So, for example, if I were to explain to someone one way to kind of rebuild that trust, if I were to feel, let's say that I was feeling a really uncomfortable feeling in my body, such as heaviness or anxiety or something like that, and it was a feeling that I obviously didn't like and I wanted it to go away, instead of trying to fix that, and so much of society says, you need to get outside and go for a walk, or um, take this vitamin, or go work out or something. And it's not that any of those things are bad, but we're kind of pushing away the sensation. And it's not necessarily enough to just sit with the sensation, because when we're just sitting with it and we don't have that trust within the body yet, we don't feel safe sitting with it. So one of the best things that you can start out with is kind of this practice of becoming very embodied, simply by speaking over yourself and saying things like, it's okay that you feel this heaviness right now. I'm not going to abandon you. I get it. I don't like this feeling either. It's uncomfortable, but it's okay. We can get through this together, and I'm going to support you through this. I'm not going to leave you just because this is hard. And I think that sometimes people can feel a little embarrassed doing that kind of thing at first because it's vulnerable and it can feel childish, but we're really building this connection with our inner child, which is that wounded part of ourselves. So I think it's extremely powerful to kind of speak to ourselves like we would speak to a little child when we're in that very vulnerable state, because we do regress when we're in that state. And I'm always telling people kind of like a few different basic things to do. For example, resourcing, which is, I mean, resourcing can be a person that makes you feel safe. It can be something that you wear, maybe a necklace or a bracelet. It can be a picture on your wall that makes you feel comfortable. It can be maybe a song you like. I mean, there are so many things. Just something that is going to bring you comfort in that moment and help kind of ground you when you're feeling really disembodied, while trying to sit with yourself and trying to sit with uncomfortable sensations. I know for me personally, it helps to kind of hold this feeling in my heart of safety with someone in mind that I physically feel very safe with. So, for example, my mom or something, thinking of that relationship and the safety that that brings me, it becomes very visceral and palpable. It's easy for me to tap into. And so I'll tell people it's okay to think of that, or to think of a memory that you love. Or, I mean, there's so many different ways that you can resource. If you have a pet, you can connect with your pet, and it's something to remind you, I'm not alone. I have this thing that's with me, that's grounding me. Another thing that you can do that's called self-havening, which is the act of kind of connecting with your own body through physical touch. And one of my favorite things to do is the self hug. But so often when people talk about the self hug, they just kind of go in for this motion. And that's not going to really do much for the nervous system, because when another person hugs us, that's not really the position that we're in or the way that we're being hugged. So it can make an actually a pretty big difference to have one hand underneath and one hand on top, and kind of pull yourself in, because the body and the nervous system, it's not really paying attention to who's doing it. We may mentally know and cognitively be aware of the fact that we are doing it to ourselves, but it doesn't change the way that the nervous system is responding to it. And the same goes for if we're speaking out loud to ourselves and comforting ourselves through the power of the voice. The nervous system doesn't really know the difference. So if you're speaking out loud to yourself, comforting yourself and letting yourself know that everything's okay, the nervous system will begin to soften and it will begin to respond in that way. So those are a few of the things that people can start practicing pretty much immediately. I think any practice where you are viewing the wounded part of yourself as a little child and just speaking so much love and protection and safety over that child. And if a child comes to you and they have a tantrum or they're in pain, I mean, ideally, we're not going to yell at them or tell them that they're stupid or that they shouldn't feel that way. That would be abusive. And yet, so many of us do that to ourselves all the time. And so, this simple act of reframing the way that we speak to ourselves, the way that we interact with ourselves, and the way that we interact with our body, it starts to reestablish this trust. Because I always say to people, if you're having a mental breakdown in the middle of the street and some stranger comes up to you and tries to comfort you, you're going to be like, who are you? I don't know you. It's not going to be comforting the way that someone who is very close to you comforting you would be. And that's what happens is we've pushed our bodies away to the extent where we're strangers to our own body. It doesn't recognize us because we have abused it or neglected it so much in the past. So if we don't take these very small steps first to reestablish that trust and that sense of safety, and then we try and dive in and do larger somatic practices, it's not going to be as powerful and make as much of a difference because we're missing the foundation of trust.
Oh, wow. Okay. So, this idea of building the relationship with yourself first, that's really interesting before you can kind of even get through to yourself.
Yes.
And can you talk a little bit about your journey with that? Was that something that came to you intuitively, that relationship with yourself, or did you work with someone who helped you get there? How did you get to that place? What did that look like for you?
Yeah. So it started out with me realizing, talk therapy is not for me. Just like with you, it was making things worse.
Mhm.
And it was triggering my nervous system more and causing these states of rumination and whatnot. So I had kind of given up on all of that. And then I met someone who was also a somatic practitioner and began meeting with her. And through that kind of mirroring experience, where it wasn't necessarily that she was telling me that this is what I had to do, but in seeing the way that she spoke about herself and about her own body and her own nervous system. Because this is another difference is, in talk therapy, so often you have someone sitting across from you and they're telling you, this is what you should be doing. This is how you should be feeling, and this is how you should reframe this thought or whatever. And there's kind of this distance between the therapist and the patient. But in somatic therapy, so often we work with mirroring, which is when we're talking about ourselves and the way that we relate to our bodies, so that it doesn't feel so aggressive to the other person. And it's more like an invitation of what's possible for them. So for me, seeing that that was possible and kind of taking that invitation, and then also having these new tools to kind of integrate and work with my inner child and get to know myself a little bit better, it really started changing everything for me. And I found myself naturally wanting to prioritize spending time with my inner child, which looked like doing a lot of meditations at first, where I was visualizing myself as a child, and I was holding her and consoling her and trying to connect with her because for so long I had completely pushed her away. And then also doing things like laying in bed instead of being productive, and listening to ASMR, and buying myself little silly things like Play-Doh or something to play with, and kind of and just reconnecting with childlike joy, and with that kind of state of innocence and ease. That was really foundational for me, and helped me start getting into my body more. And then I found myself wanting to go outside more and feeling more comfortable around other people, and slowly my relationship to my body started changing, and I started realizing that because I was accepting myself more, and I wasn't shaming every emotion that came up and shaming every thought that came up. And instead, I was nurturing myself and really reparenting myself, as if it was my full time job. It started changing my entire worldview, including, like I said, my relationship to my body, and having that embodiment again. It was shaking up everything in my entire life, because I was thinking, wow, why do I not feel uncomfortable in my body all the time the way I used to? It almost felt like I was doing something wrong or forbidden, to be connected to myself in that way after so long.
Interesting. Okay. Was that for you during your the time that you were identifying as trans, or was that sort of part of your detransition experience? What was the timeline there?
Yeah, at the time, I was kind of in this weird limbo where I was feeling uncomfortable with identifying as trans, and I didn't really understand where that uncomfortability was coming from. And I was slowly experimenting with, I hadn't detransitioned, but I was kind of in this transitional phase where I was slowly experimenting with things that I was wearing, and experimenting with different pronouns like they, them, and kind of easing into something that felt a little bit less restrictive for me at the time, because I felt kind of weird about everything. And so the combination of already feeling like I wasn't being my true self, and I didn't really know what that meant, but there was something happening. Some kind of shift was happening where I think that in general, as I got closer to healing my trauma, I just couldn't continue to reconcile with this expression of myself that wasn't myself at all. It was an expression of my trauma completely. And so as the trauma started to fall away, it started to feel really bizarre to me. And so then in integrating the somatic work, I just started, um, realizing that that connection to my body was showing me that I really wasn't being authentic to who I was before. And it was kind of this slow process where I just realized I wasn't experiencing what I had initially thought of as gender dysphoria anymore, which was actually really crazy. And what we wear really has nothing to do with biological sex or gender or anything like that. But for me, something like wearing a dress was excruciating before, because of that disconnect from my body that I had obviously translated as gender dysphoria. And so it was little things like just feeling comfortable with that for the first time in my entire life.
Okay, wow, that's powerful. So, can you tell us, and I know we may not have time today to get into everything, and I was listening to your interview with Stephanie Wynn, and you talk about growing up in this Christian cult community setting that you grew up in, and how that influenced so much, and it was an abusive sort of cult, and then you also went through conversion therapy, and so you've had this really intense journey. And can you tell us just sort of what did your transition consist of? So, what steps did you take for transition?
Well, I took all of the social steps for transition, and as far as physical steps, that mostly went along with the social steps for transition. But then I was also on testosterone for around 3 years.
Okay. Okay. Did you end up getting any surgeries?
No.
Okay. All right. And then, so the testosterone for 3 years, and then you were able to sort of come back in touch with yourself and disconnect from that. Was there a moment that you remember where you said, I'm going to stop taking this? Or was it a gradual sort of build up for that decision?
It was very, very gradual,
Mhm.
almost painfully gradual. And I genuinely think that a huge portion of that was how intertwined I was with this ideology and
Mhm.
how much I believed that this was a part of me. It was really difficult to reconcile with the fact that the way that I had been living for years was not me at all. It was really scary because then I was forced to ask myself, well, if I'm not this person, then who am I and what am I? And I think that there was this massive distrust that came up that I had to reconcile with, that I think a lot of detransitioners experienced, and it was incredibly painful and frustrating, where I was so shocked, actually physically in a state of shock over the fact that I had ever been so disconnected from myself and my body that I felt uncomfortable being a woman. It was like a night and day experience, where I suddenly was realizing that I felt so comfortable being a woman after dealing with this intense discomfort for so long. And I had no idea how to reconcile that. I had no idea how to bridge that gap. And the gap really stemmed from massive dissociation from myself. Which, stemmed from the fact that I had been struggling with dissociative identity disorder, which I now don't deal with at all because it was completely from PTSD, completely from trauma. And healing that dissociation by becoming extremely rooted and grounded within the body was just pivotal for me, in every single area of my life, truly.
Wow. Okay. And so did you, and how old are you, by the way?
I'm about to be 32.
Okay. Okay. And how old were you when you first started testosterone?
I technically can't get into dates like that, or like, yeah, because,
Okay.
well,
Because of the lawsuit?
yeah.
Okay. Okay. 100% support that, understand that. So, for the people listening, Layton is also involved in a lawsuit right now, which is very exciting. And, hopefully we will hear more. But the lawsuit is, of course, in regards to the medical treatment that you were given.
Mm.
And this is a development that's happening right now in the US in a broader sense, where we're starting to see these cases where detransitioners are standing up and saying, this was medical abuse. I was vulnerable in these different ways, and this was not care that was given. So I was wondering if we could maybe talk a little bit, kind of almost directly to maybe other women who are experiencing these feelings, and how, so, like, let's say, you're a young woman or really a woman of any age, but you're experiencing, for example, extreme discomfort with your breasts, let's say, and maybe you can't stand to be naked, you can't stand to shower, to feel them, to see them. What are the kinds of things that maybe a woman or a girl could do about that?
Mm. So, when it comes to any kind of discomfort like that, I mean, it's always stemming from some sort of trauma or some sort of dissociation or disconnect from, the body. And it's really interesting because when we actually get into the nervous system and understanding the nervous system and understanding the brain and how all of these things impact us, experiencing any kind of trauma whatsoever. And trauma doesn't always have to be this one massive event. It can be little events that add up, or I mean, trauma can even just be feeling so overwhelmed by your day-to-day life or by your daily responsibilities that you really struggle to stay embodied. So when we're in that state, we experience so much in the brain that just has to be taken into account. For example, the prefrontal cortex shutting down, and then we're losing access to logic, and we can't see things clearly. We can't process things in our right mind the way that we normally would. And it's very traumatic. Then we have an increase in function of the amygdala, and that affects it so that we're very, very hyper aware of our emotions, but not necessarily in a way that would translate into being self-aware. There are these heightened emotions, mood swings, feeling like we can't see outside of our emotions, and this is where we see a lot of emotional reasoning and whatnot. And we also have issues with the hippocampus, which affects our memory recall, which I feel like is very important to look at when people are struggling with any kind of body discomfort or dysphoria, because we may think back on our childhood and think back on certain times where maybe we just felt discomfort in our body, but because of the discomfort that we're currently feeling, coupled with the dissociation and the disconnection, we kind of bridge that gap on our own with this dysfunctional hippocampus activity and fill in the blanks as if we always had dysphoria, when that may not necessarily be what's happening. So it's really important that we kind of have that understanding. I know for me, anything that I experience now, because of the understanding that I have of the nervous system and the brain, I'm very aware of the fact that it's not just a thought. It's not just a pathology. It's not just this thing that's happening in my brain. It happens in the body first. So, really, the most important thing that anyone could do is get connected to the body. And I think that a lot of people, they think about connecting to their body and they think about going outside or going for a walk or doing yoga or meditating. And those things, they're really good. They can be super helpful for some people. But I think for people experiencing kind of like this next level physical discomfort, this next level trauma, and disconnect from the body, probably are going to need something deeper, such as somatic therapy. And it doesn't even have to be something where they go pay to see a somatic therapist. I mean, they can go on YouTube and do their own research around this kind of thing, do their own research on the nervous system, and just try these different tools, try incorporating and integrating these different tools to reconnect with their body and reestablish trust. Because if we don't have that, then, like I was saying before, nothing else that we do is really going to matter. So if I was still experiencing discomfort with my breasts, which I don't anymore, but if I was, it would not help me at all to just say to myself, well, you're a woman, so it doesn't matter. We can't cognitively override these somatic responses, these physiological responses. So I think in that moment, we have to be very aware of the fact that this is the manifestation of a trauma. It's the manifestation of a deep wound, and kind of visualizing it as if it's a little child walking up to you, handing you this manifestation like a gift. Because as much as a lot of people don't want to look at it this way, it is a gift. Having these sensations in our body and these responses is a gift, because it's letting us know that there's something wrong. It's letting us know that there's something that needs to come up to be healed, and it's trying to get our attention so that we stop ignoring it, or so that we stop misunderstanding it. So I think that really having a lot of grace for that part of ourselves, having a lot of compassion, and instead of shaming ourselves for feeling that way, telling ourselves and understanding that it's completely normal, that it makes sense that we feel that way based on the things that we've gone through, and creating a space for it, and trying to kind of go inside of that space or inside of that container and hear what it has to say.
Okay. Yeah. So When I was listening to your interview with Stephanie, you talked about how you had gone to a therapist when you had dissociative identity disorder, and you sort
Yes.
of landed upon this trans identity. And so I was wondering, and listening to you talk about finding that connection and not just sorting it out cognitively, but sorting it out with realizing that there's a problem coming up in the body. I wonder what your thoughts are on kind of like why is it that the trans identity is sort of settled upon in so many of these cases with people who are coming to their therapist saying, I have these severe discomforts. And then, of course, there's sort of the outside political reasons and all that. But in terms of like the therapeutic relationship, why do you think it is that it so often comes to, oh, well, you might be trans or you might be the opposite sex?
Mm. I mean, I think that that's such a complex answer that, I mean, it really, none of it, in my opinion, exists outside of these much deeper agendas that are kind of surrounding it. But I also think that there's an element where the therapists receive training on this kind of thing, and they're told what to look out for. And I think that when they're in the moment, they feel like maybe they have this answer to give someone who's in pain, and maybe they can be the one to provide them with this thing that's going to give them euphoria and completely change their life and all of this stuff. I think there's also an element to it where there are practitioners that just care about money, and they know that this is an industry that makes a lot of money, and they're not so concerned about what the person is actually going through or how they are going to feel about this long term. Um, and also, quite honestly, I think that in that field, in the field of therapy and psychiatry, we have a lack of understanding of neuroscience, and there's a lack of understanding of the body and physiology, and there's this massive disconnect where, I mean, just in general, anyone who is coming presenting any sort of discomfort in their life is going to be pathologized to some extent. You could come in and be feeling depression because somebody in your life just died, and within 5 minutes they're writing you a prescription. That's just what this has become. It's become mic therapy, as they would say, kind of like this fast food approach. So I think that that's very seductive to a lot of practitioners, is feeling like they have the answer and they just get to provide it, and then they don't actually have to do the work. But at the same time, this is just what they're taught. They are not educated most of the time on all of the things that they really need to be educated on.
Mhm. Yeah, that's an interesting point about they kind of get to be the ones to offer this conclusion, this solution, and I can understand that. Like you said, there's this a whole myriad of different motivations, but that one is maybe the more pure, more good-hearted one in terms of they want to help, but they are reaching for this one prescriptive answer that they're sort of putting onto their patient. And then could you talk a little bit more about your own feelings of gender dysphoria? Like what did that feel like for you? How did it feel in the body and in the mind for you?
It's hard to express how it felt in the body because I was so severely dissociated from my body at the time, to the point where I was experiencing really scary physiological symptoms of extreme dizziness, extreme nausea, extreme memory loss. The discomfort that I had and the level of dissociation was something that was just beyond debilitating, which is why I think it's so insidious that that I was just put on testosterone anyway, in that state. But I know that mentally it was like Satan's playground in my brain all the time with everything, because I was in that state of survival mode where every part of my brain that was supposed to be functioning properly was completely inverted and doing the opposite of what it was supposed to do, and everything was clashing against each other all the time, and creating this big disconnect in my body. So we have this combination where, because of my trauma, I could not connect to my physical body. And then on top of that, I my entire life had dealt with all kinds of body issues like eating disorders and OCD and body dysmorphia. And so I had these other things that caused me to hyperfixate on anything that was wrong with my body at all times. And this is still something that I struggle with, but just not even remotely the way that I used to, and not in a dysphoric sense, not gender dysphoric. Um, but yeah, I would hyperfixate on things. I did not feel like I was as beautiful as other girls were growing up, and I felt like all I could notice were my flaws. And I had a pretty late puberty, and growing up, I was told that I looked like a boy, and so I had all of these insecurities that led to me feeling more like a trans woman, in the sense that I felt like this biological male going through life trying to convince everyone that I was a woman. And it's funny because as I got older, no one ever thought that. No one ever was looking at me and telling me that I looked like a man or anything. And it kind of ended up being this self-fulfilling prophecy where then I went on testosterone for 3 years and then detransitioned, and especially when I first detransitioned, people did think I was a trans woman. And it's really interesting kind of how that ended up playing out. So I had so much going on in my body and so much going on in my mind. And I think that there was this part of me that just, I already felt so disconnected from myself that I didn't know if that was my real identity or not. And that's documented pretty well in my medical notes too, where I'm just constantly going back and forth and saying that I'm unsure about all of these things. And they're just like, oh, it doesn't matter. Here's some more testosterone. It's just crazy. And so I think that's also why it was so shocking to me and so powerful to me when that started to change, because I had just always experienced this dissociation and always experienced so much discomfort. And like I said, even though I still struggle with nitpicking myself and having these insecurities, it's at a much more normal level now, and none of it has to do with gender dysphoria. So that was a drastic difference for me to just have, I guess, normal female insecurities.
Yeah, and wow, so you would tell your therapist, your doctor, and that you had this sensation where you felt like a trans woman, and
Yes.
did that for them just kind of they just heard trans, and so they
Yeah.
just thought, okay, trans, trans, trans. They didn't look into that deeper at all?
Yeah, not really. I mean, and it gets worse when I'm trying to explain what I mean, and I'm saying I feel like this man masquerading as a woman, and I'm doing my best to express exactly what it is that I feel, and it's being completely flipped around. And because of the mental state that I was in at the time, and because I was already very gender nonconforming at the time, and going by they them pronouns, not even for any gender reason. I kind of just didn't want to be associated with any kind of identity, weirdly enough. I think because I felt so disconnected from myself that everything just made me feel uncomfortable. Everything made me feel weird, you know? So I think that all of these things were kind of just thrown into a bucket, and that was the result.
Mhm. Wow, and that feeling that you describe of just sort of everything made you feel uncomfortable, what is that? Because I know, a lot of us have felt that way at certain times, and yeah, so what is that? Like, can you talk more about that?
I think for me, it was very layered. I think for one, it was very uncomfortable to try and find my place in the world after having been in a cult and gone through conversion therapy, And I had been through rehab before, and I just felt like at a very young age, I had already gone through so much and had so many different identities and so many different things happening. It was like a whirlwind. And so my life circumstances were very overwhelming. I also think there was a kind of this really strong sensory overload and these sensory issues where if you are already traumatized or in a state of survival mode, you are going to become very hypersensitive. And that's because the body and the nervous system become hypervigilant. And so when we're in that very hypervigilant state, everything that happens is too loud, it's too bright, it's too overwhelming, it's too much. And that includes what's happening within our own body. It includes what's happening within our own mind. Everything just becomes too much. And I think that that's what I was experiencing. My nervous system just could not take any more trauma. My body could not take any more trauma. And anything that would happen just kind of shot me farther away from my body. And I didn't have the tools to deal with discomfort or to deal with trauma or to deal with those emotions and those feelings that we don't necessarily want to deal with. So everything just bubbled up all the time like a volcano, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. So, when you did go on to testosterone, did you have any experience of relief? Did it feel wrong right away? Did it feel right for a time? What was that like for you?
It felt right at first. And I think a lot of that had to do with the fact that it was giving me something. I was having something to change my circumstances, something to change what I had been feeling and what I had been dealing with every single day. So at the time, any change was kind of a positive one. Um, and it also gave me hope that I was going to have a new life. I was going to have a different life. I was going to be a different person. And at the time, I didn't know how to take the person that I was and rebuild the core from the bottom up. I only knew how to scrap everything and start over. Um, and so yeah, it was, I guess, doing what I had done up until that point over and over and over again of being, because I was so disconnected for myself and didn't know who I was. I just scrapped everything and started over. And a few months in, especially considering the whole DID aspect and the fact that I would have times where I would start to feel a little bit more connected to myself. And when that would happen, I didn't want to be on the testosterone. But I believed and had convinced myself, as I had also been convinced, that that wasn't the real me. That when that would come up, that was a different part of me that was not the real me. And it was really interesting. So it was kind of this complex situation of back and forths, but it never felt 100% right because I was always in that state of dissociation and kind of being all over the place.
Mhm. Did the dissociation continue throughout the time you were taking testosterone? How long did that last?
Oh yeah. I mean, I struggled with severe dissociation my entire life, especially because I had a head injury as a child. That Yeah, it was really severe. And I still, I don't even know. You can kind of see it. I have like this massive scar on my forehead. It's
Oh, okay.
it's pretty long. So yeah, I basically cracked my skull open as a child, and my brain, it had a hard time recovering. I was already very sensitive and going through a lot of trauma. And I fully believe that it just made me so much more susceptible to dissociation as a response because as young as I can remember since that happened, I really struggled to feel like I was in my body. I had these episodes of depersonalization and derealization that were very, very scary. So that did continue and went on all throughout my childhood and teenage years and while I was on testosterone. And it didn't stop until I was doing the somatic work. Although I will say that before I started this somatic work, I was already doing things like setting different boundaries in my life, and I wasn't I had taken a break from seeing regular therapists, and I was rebuilding a relationship with my family. And so the dissociation had already started to decrease quite a bit as I was becoming more embodied. And then the somatic work was just like the cherry on top. Um, and yeah, it's just, I mean, unless I'm having, I deal with allergies and stuff. Unless I'm experiencing anaphylaxis or something really extreme, my body will not dissociate anymore. And I didn't even know that was possible.
Okay, wow. I mean, I'm happy to hear that, and I have to say it's so heartbreaking that what's offered as care is, these cross-sex hormones for people who are going through something, who've been through trauma and have
Yeah.
these types of experiences. And can you explain what exactly disassociating means?
Yeah, I think it's kind of hard to explain what it feels like for anyone who's never actually experienced it, but essentially what's happened is the body becomes so traumatized that parts of the brain are shutting off and separating from each other, and we end up only really having the capacity to operate kind of out of one place at a time, which can it can lead to physiological responses where everything around us feels like a dream, and that's derealization when we feel like we're in a dream or we're in a video game. Or depersonalization, where, when I would have a depersonalization episode, it was as if when I would be speaking, my voice sounded like a robot voice to me, or like someone else's voice entirely. And I could not connect to myself as a person, which was pretty disturbing. And then my regular dissociative episodes, um, I would just feel very disconnected from the world around me. I would feel disconnected from other people. It's basically, our body's response to, I can't handle any more trauma, so I'm going to respond with this protective mechanism, that kind of numbs out our emotional responses to things, and we're really operating in a different part of the brain, that can almost feel like being under the influence in a way, because we kind of um, lose the part of ourselves that is super concerned with things the way that we usually are. We don't really have that access to logic. We definitely don't have that access to memory. And we're just kind of floating through everything. And it really is a trauma response. I think that um, in this society, and especially with the younger generations, it's kind of become a meme to talk about dissociating, and to dissociate and think that it's this funny thing, but in reality it is very scary, and it's a sign of severe trauma. And the more that we do it, the more we allow ourselves to dissociate, the worse it's going to get.
Okay, so it gets worse if it continues on.
Yes.
And, with that memeing, it seems like it's almost a trivialization of
Yes.
some of these issues, and I wonder if that's fed into by the therapists who are so eager to, prescribe the drugs, prescribe the hormones, whatever the case may be, that they're almost normalizing maybe those sensations, and like the way you're describing it is that it's something that we can grow out of and,
Yes.
work through, and it's not just something that you have, that it's just you and needs to be medicated. It's something that you, like you said, your brain is doing to protect you in a way. So that's really interesting to hear. And then I was wondering, when you were on testosterone, what were some of the changes that you experienced? And is there anything that you are still dealing with that is an unpleasant side effect?
Yeah. I felt like I experienced so many changes pretty much immediately. It's ironic because when I first went on testosterone, I gained a bunch of weight. Like a lot of weight. I have always been extremely thin my entire life, and I gained a lot of weight pretty quickly. And then when I detransitioned, my body has never gone back. Even though it's been years, my body has never gone back to the way that it looked before. My face changed drastically, and it has definitely changed since detransitioning. But I don't look the way that I did before testosterone. My voice became extremely deep, and I've had to do voice training just to not sound the way that I used to sound. But my voice will never go back to where it was before. It's not even in the same room as where it was before. It is so drastically different. I have experienced a lot of physical pain, a lot of physical discomfort, a lot of joint pain that I didn't necessarily have before. Then there are all sorts of hormonal issues and genital issues, and just, it's kind of an endless list. On top of that, my allergies got a million times worse. I mean, before I went on testosterone, I was only allergic to like two things, and never to the point of anaphylaxis. And that's something that just got a lot worse on the testosterone. And I would assume it's because my entire endocrine system was under attack from this foreign substance. I mean, yes, we do have testosterone in our bodies, but not to that level. And I think it's really kind of ridiculous, honestly, the way that people have tried to normalize this as if it's not that big of a deal, when it is quite literally a trauma to the body. It's a trauma to the endocrine system and the nervous system and our organs and our joints. So I've had all kinds of issues with that, and skin pain. I mean, just, yeah, all kinds of things. And I obviously had a lot of facial hair and stuff from being on testosterone. Yeah, there, I mean, the list goes on and on. I don't think that most of these things are ever going to go back to normal, and people tell me to be patient, but I have been. It's been years, and I am not back to normal. And I do have hope that maybe over time some things will lessen up a little bit, but I'm also being realistic, and just accepting that this is just part of my journey, and the things that I'm dealing with are just the things that I'm dealing with, and it is what it is. It is hard because I now, very ironically, after dying to look like a man for for several years, I now have this insecurity around that, where sometimes I'll post videos or I'll do an interview or something, and people, some of them know that I'm a detransitioner, and I don't know if others do. And they'll comment telling me that I look like a man, and like dissecting things about me, and telling me that I have a man voice, or saying, what's wrong with your voice? And it's really hurtful. It's difficult to deal with that kind of thing. But I also think that dealing with that kind of thing and being able to have the capacity to handle it is such a testament to somatic therapy, and to all of this work that I'm doing, because that is not something that I ever could have handled before. I never would have shown my face again. So yeah, I mean, I think that every detransitioner, especially if you've been on testosterone for a year or longer, is experiencing permanent side effects that just aren't going to go away. It is not reversible the way that people like to say that it is.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I think, a lot of these commenters, they are most likely having their issues of their own that they're
Oh,
going
yeah.
through. They're projecting all kinds of things. You definitely don't look like a man. You look like a beautiful woman.
Thank
Um,
you.
yeah. And is there anything that you can take for, your joint pain? Is there anything that helps with that, or just kind of enduring it?
I mean, you can probably imagine, after, like, I was on so many psych medications, and so many medications my entire life, and then testosterone and stuff. So I'm kind of against all of that stuff now. I was taking CBD for a little bit, and that was helping my pain, but I ended up developing an allergy to it, which is really common with like the histamine related issues that I deal with. So yeah, there's not really much that I can do about it. I am in physical therapy. I go to physical therapy twice a week, and that tends to help. But if I miss it for any period of time, the pain, I mean, after a few weeks, it really starts to come back. Um, so it can be disheartening, because I just think, am I going to have to be in physical therapy my entire life? Meanwhile, they are pushing this onto people and telling them that it's harmless. I mean, I was told you can just go on, and if you change your mind, you can come off. And the only things they really said I was going to have to worry about long term were some of the genital changes that could happen and the voice change. So I was thinking that everything else, as long as I was on testosterone for under 5 years, I thought that most of it would kind of um, reverse, and that's just obviously not the case. So my body, I mean, I'm currently also experiencing perimenopause. So my body it has aged so much further than my age, it's just been really intense. But I live a very healthy lifestyle, and I I have had a lot of relief through the somatic work that I do and through physical therapy. And I also get acupuncture and dry needling through physical therapy. And that stuff is really helpful for my nervous system too. So yeah, I try and focus on those things and not feel too haunted by the fact that this is something that is probably um never going to let up, and I just try and focus on the things I can control.
Yeah. Is there any insurance that covers your acupuncture and your physical therapy, or is it all something you have to pay for?
Luckily, it does. Although I
Okay.
will say that as far as I've looked into things with my hormones because I've had so many hormonal issues since all of this, as you can imagine. And there's no help for detransitioners. Their suggestion to me was to just go back to the gender clinic. And I was like, okay, well, I'm not doing that because I'm not a guinea pig. I'm not going to go and have you, especially because I now deal with estrogen sensitivity that's pretty severe. So if they want me to go back and then they just want to pump me full of estrogen just to see what happens when they don't actually know, it's kind of ridiculous. And so for things like that, I would have to pay out of pocket for someone who is actually going to take it more seriously.
Okay. Wow. God, just go back to the gender clinic. Like, that's just the worst advice. My goodness.
Yeah.
Um, with the lawsuit, are you connecting with other detransitioners?
Yeah, it's been really nice. We have this group chat that we all talk in, and and it feels good because it feels like we're all kind of on the same team and helping each other out outside of an ideology, because many of us have completely different opinions about our detransition and about trans ideology and about all of this stuff. But we also have this shared trauma that really kind of brings us together and gives us this sense of loyalty with each other, where we're willing to help each other out and be there for each other. So it's been really nice.
That's wonderful. That's really good to hear. Is the lawsuit something that you have to spend a lot of time on? Is it stressful at all, other than the good parts of talking to the other detransitioners?
It's definitely stressful.
Mhm.
It's definitely stressful. There are a lot of people that don't like what I'm doing, including, of course, the people that I'm suing and including the government. It's been really intense. I feel like there's a lot of pressure on me, and I've lost people because of it. I've lost people that I thought, cared about me and loved me, but they are just so deep in all of this, and I can understand that. I can understand that they feel hurt. They feel hurt and they feel confused, because the last time they knew me was kind of when I was within all of that. But yeah, it's been painful. It has been, honestly, I think that being in a lawsuit is probably the most stressful thing that anyone could experience, aside from maybe getting a divorce or something. It's a lot. It's a lot on the nervous system, and especially when you're being put out there publicly in different ways, and then you have all kinds of energy projected onto you at all times. And I've had people write articles about me saying ridiculous things like that I'm a fake detransitioner, or that I was pushed to detransition, and just all of these things, and that I'm infiltrating this to spread an agenda, that my detransition's political, and it's just ridiculous. Suing was not something that ever even crossed my mind until I was talking to other detransitioners, and then the things I was saying back to them about their experiences just became a mirror to me, and I was like, okay, wait a minute. The things I experienced were really messed up. I just, up until that point, I had been blaming myself. And I think that a lot of detransitioners go through that, and we're called grifters and told that we're doing this for attention and that we can't take responsibility for what we did. I think that for years, a lot of us completely blamed ourselves. And the thing is that, we can't take the complete blame. I didn't go out in the streets and find someone to give me testosterone. It was prescribed to me from a medical professional who overlooked every single red flag that I had. So that was something that I really had to acknowledge, and in seeing kind of how widespread this has become, and how this has kind of become like a band-aid to slap on any issue that someone might have. And especially when we're talking about children, that's when I really started to realize that this is an ideology and this is a cult-like movement. And that's outside of just people that are individuals that happen to struggle with dysphoria. I mean, there is a separate agenda going on, that they're not even a part of. They're a victim to it. And it just became very important to me to bring that to light.
Mhm. Very well said. Yeah. And is there somewhere people can go to support the lawsuit, to donate or anything like that? Is there anywhere people can go?
No.
Okay.
I don't have a GoFundMe or anything like that. If people want to support me, they can check out my website and get into contact with me there. Um, I love having conversations with other detransitioners, or with parents of people that are going through this.
Excellent. Okay, great. And I will link that below, so Layton's website, so people can check it out. And thank you so much, Layton. I really appreciate you sharing your wisdom, your thoughts, your story. And, it's so sad to hear about, like you said, there's this whole storm, this whole movement going on that's politicizing, that has nothing to do with people struggling with these feelings, and they are the victims of it, like you said. So, yeah, and I'm glad these things are coming to light. I'm glad that you're doing this lawsuit. I know it must be very stressful and intense, but I hope that it will, be fruitful in the end. And is there anything you want to leave us with? Just anything else you want to add before we wrap up?
I don't think so.
Okay, that's okay. Yeah, I kind of put you on the spot for that one, but
It's
thank
okay.
you. Yeah, thank you so much, Layton. I really enjoyed speaking with you. Hope that I get to do it again sometime.
Thank you so much.